Hello chess lovers, welcome to the new video. This is a special video made upon request by one of my viewers. He asked me to show a game between Pranav and Perunovic from round 4 of Serbia Open. So let's see what happened in this game. E4, E5, so Perunovic was white and Pranav was black. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, so we have Spanish game. By the way, I played Perunovic maybe 20 years ago. At that time he was just a master, he was a little kid, but he completely demolished me. That's what I remember from 20 years ago, or maybe even 25 years ago, I'm not sure. Alright, so here in this position, many modern players play the Berlin, but Pranav chose the classical approach, the Morphy move a6. And bishop retreated, bishop a4, knight f6, and here the main theory goes castles kingside, or in modern times d3. Carlsen likes to play like this. But Perunovic chose knight c3. It's becoming more and more popular. Maybe 30 years ago, this was considered a meek move, but these days, this is a pretty good move. And let's see why. After b5, bishop retreats, bishop b3, and here, normal square for the f8 bishop is e7. But now that it's harder for white to achieve c3 and d4, because there is a knight on c3, it makes sense to put the bishop on c5, and that's just what black did. And as I mentioned, white would like to go c3 and d4 if possible, so he needs to remove this knight. So he goes knight d5 with a clear intention. And some of you might wonder, hey, what about this e4 pawn? Can't black just take it? Yes, he can, but it's a theoretical line where white gets great initiative, and black can quickly be demolished if he is not well versed in this line. After d4, for example, ed4 would be a serious mistake, because after castling there are ideas like this, and also this knight is very strong, the bishop is looking at the king side, the knight is ready to join the attack, everything is pointing at the king side, because that's where black king will hide, and you can't really go back because of the pin, so that would be a terrible position for black. Of course, he can take with the bishop, which is better, but even then, after knight takes, queen g4, there is a double attack, not a good position for black. So this is all theory, very complicated, but these strong players, they know this, so black is not going to take here. So he played d6, even though it was possible, but you need to be very prepared to go into something like that, and even then maybe it's not good. So after d6, a nice strengthening move and opening up the bishop. We have c3, so that's why it's planned. He wants to establish a center, and again, if you take the pawn, white just attacks your bishop, opens up his own bishop, and the game continues with a good position for white. So instead of that, black wanted to prevent any kind of future pin by this bishop, so he preemptively played h6. So now this is not possible in the future after d4. d4 came, and you see, even though the bishop was blocked, now it's open. So if there was no pawn on h6, this would be possible once the black bishop retreats, and it did retreat, bishop a7. And here white chose to exchange. He didn't have to do it, but okay. Knight f6, queen f6, and bishop d5. Attacking the knight and pinning the knight. And now, how will you play? Will you go bishop b7, or will you go bishop d7 in this position? Think about it. So the logical move is bishop b7, but there is a downside to it. So when you put bishop here, first of all, now you have two pieces that are pinned, that are behind the pin. And second of all, from b7, the bishop cannot participate on this side of the board. So that's why black chose bishop d7. And even though he is still pinned, once he is ready, he's gonna remove this rook from a8. And then the d5 bishop will not be pinning anything. It will be staring in the empty air. While from d7, the light square bishop can later do some active operations on the king side. So a4 happened with some ideas like this later on. We'll see about that. Castling, defending the rook. And we have bishop e3. And you remember I told you ideas like this. Now, if black is not careful, let's say he plays some random move. There is a very unpleasant variation. AB, AB, and watch this. Bishop c6, removing the defender. The knight was defending the bishop. Removing the defender, bishop c6, and rook a7. And watch, after rook a7, d takes e5, attacking the queen, opening up the bishop, and black is lost. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful. That's why first black moved the bishop away from this square. Now, if this trade happens, he will take with the pawn, and his rook will be always protected. Okay, castles, kingside, rook ad8. This is what I was talking about many moves ago. Now, there is no piece here, so the white d5 bishop isn't pinning this knight. It's just attacking it, but it's not pinning it, so the knight can move. The knight can move. ab5, ab5, and now white would like to develop his queen, but he has a problem with his d4 pawn. For example, queen e2, the queen is no longer protecting, and just ed4, not good for white, because look, 1, 2, 3 attackers on this square, and only two defenders. Yeah, white can interpose this, but then he gives up the bishop pair. He has nothing. So that's why before developing the queen, we have to solve the problem of the d4 pawn. And how do we solve it? By trading it. So that's what white did. It's a logical move. d5, d5, bishop took on b6, cb6, and we have the desired move, queen e2. And let's analyze this position a little bit. At first glance, black has two very weak pawns, but it's not easy to get to them because the b6 pawn can be defended along the 6th rank, and the b5 pawn can be defended by this bishop when the knight moves. So it's not easy for white to get to these pawns, while they control some squares and also they give some open lines. And the black is probably not going to use them, but there are upsides to these double pawns. So let's see. Knight moved away, allowing the bishop to defend against queen b5, and now white tried another attack here with some ideas like this. But let's see. Bishop b4, opening up the rook so he can defend the pawn from here. You don't want to defend from here because that's passive. From d6, the rook is still on the d file, and maybe sometimes it can go to the king side. But the more important point is that it's on the d file because that's the open file, right? And here white was supposed to put the brakes on and play it something like rook d1 and say, okay, I don't have anything here, let's just play cautiously. Instead, he continued with his plan, rook a6 I mentioned, so he wants to pressure this pawn. But now, because there is no bishop on d7, black can go here. If the bishop was on d7, black would have to go here and go passive, and then white would take the d file or the a file. But after rook d6, this is why bishop g4 was such a good move on the previous move. These two pieces, they defend b6 sufficiently, and it's hard for white to continue. Also, there are ideas like doubling on the d file and maybe penetrating here later. We had bishop b3 and rook f d8 as mentioned. So now black is the boss of the d file. It's very hard to challenge him there. At the moment, there are no entry squares. Both d2 and d1 are covered by white's pieces, but in the future this might change. Actually, it changed immediately after knight e1, but anyway, black could have taken that knight and always achieved that. But for now, black doesn't want to get in because he doesn't have any follow-up. Also, white might cut the connection between the rooks in some variations. So we had knight g6 looking at this square and also this square. And here is where white makes a big mistake. So he played f3. And why is this a mistake? Let's see. Let's compare it with what he should have played. So let's say he wanted some counterplay against the f7 and played rook a7. So there is a double attack. So here black needs to trade one of white's pieces to stop the attack on f7. For example, bishop e6, bishop takes, queen takes, g3, stopping the knight from coming in. And let's compare this position. Remember that there is a pawn here with what happened in the game. So after f3, bishop e6, queen e6, g3, stopping the invasion. There is a small difference between the previous variation. So this pawn is not on f2. And why is this important? Because now the second rank is open, and at the end of that, behind that rank is white's king, and that will play a crucial role in the future. So that's why in this position f3 was a mistake, because it opened up the second rank. Okay, let's continue. Bishop e6, bishop, queen, g3, and now a typical move. You have a target, go after the target, open up the king. h5, knight g2, putting some control here, but not really, because after h4 you cannot really take, because then the queen comes in, the rook will follow, and the knight jumping here will follow as well. This is a lost position. Alright, so Perunovic finds the best move, queen g5, trying to defend with his queen, but he cannot control d2 anymore, so rook d2 came, and here you cannot take this pawn with a knight. If you do that, then after queen h3 you cannot defend the h2 spot. You can actually, but then after rook f2 you weaken this square, and after rook d1, rook f1 is checkmate. So for this reason white took with the pawn so that he can have a square for the queen to defend, and this is what happened. Queen h3, queen g3. So because there is no pawn here, the queen can now cover everything. And here, as black, you don't want to trade queens. You want to trade them if it gives you something, but here it doesn't give you anything. So black just retreated while attacking the rook, and he keeps this monster rook here. There are ideas like this, and also ideas like this or this with some penetrating possibilities. So rook came back, and here now white captured on b2. So we took a pawn and we freed this square for another rook to come. White continued h5, and now knight f4, ef4, queen f4, and rook dd2. So let's stop here. As you can see, white is a pawn up, so he has 5 pawns and black has 4 pawns. But look at, first of all, look at these rooks. They are dominating the second rank. Second of all, look at these pawns. They are all weak, and these two guys in the middle will become weak soon. And third of all, look at the kings. White king pretty open, black king pretty safe. So white played rook ft1, And here there was a possibility to just finish the game immediately after queen c5 check, king h1. You give up your two rooks for the queen, but you pick up all the pawns. You will pick up all these pawns, and you can do it with checks. Maybe even this pawn you can, and then you will just have 4 pawns against 0. So that's a winning position. But instead of that, so black didn't play queen c5. He went for another approach. It's also good, but the other one was more precise. Rook g2, king h1, queen h3. Now there is a triple attack here, so there is no way to defend this anymore, so you have to somehow trade the black queen. So that's what white did. Rook a8, king h7, queen f5, trading the queens. But what's the cost of this trade? The cost is that now you have this terrible pawns. These are some of the worst pawns I have ever seen, and some of them fall immediately. Rook h2 check, king g1, rook, other rook on g2, king f1, and rook comes back with the threat of checkmate and attacking here. King g1, rook picks up the pawn. Now this is a threat, this is a threat. I don't know how white can save the pawns. He tried f6, but after rook g5, king f1, rook f5, attacking 2 pawns, actually 3 pawns. White tried rook d3, but if he took, then we just take on f3, and after king e1, king g7, we are 2 pawns up, and we will always be able to exchange one pair of rooks because we have a rook on the second rank. And once we manage to threaten, there are 2 mechanisms how to do that, but it's unavoidable. One is, for example, to go to the second rank, then give checks on these 2 squares, force the queen here, and then give a check here and trade one of the rooks. So that's one of the mechanisms to exchange unavoidably one pair of rooks. And once you exchange one pair of rooks, you will be in an endgame with 2 pawns up, with only one rook on the board for each side, and there is no chance for white to generate counterplay. Another mechanism is just to create mating threats and force white to offer the exchange himself. This one is harder to show because I will have to invent the position. Alright, so rook g3 was played, defending 2 guys but leaving the f6 guys. So rook f6, rook a7, and now rook a4 was the final move of the game. Why? Because again, black can always force exchange of one pair of rooks by positioning the other rook on somewhere on the second rank, and then threatening checkmate. And there is that mechanism that I just showed you how it works. All right, so that was a game that Pranav won in style against a very strong grandmaster from Serbia, Perunovic, but it was not his day. The young guy had the upper hand. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that my viewer is happy, the one that requested to see this game. See you all in the next video. Bye.